ABC Radio National, Big Ideas. And tonight's Zoom event is being recorded for that show, so we'll be able to kind of revisit it in an audio form later. And thank you very much, and take it away, Paul Barclay.
Thanks very much, Chrissy. It's fantastic to be here for this virtual Avid Reader event with Billy Bragg. We are, of course, all Zooming these days, but let's hope it's not too long before these conversations can once again take place face-to-face in front of an actual audience, even though we are enjoying the technology. We are here tonight to hear from celebrated musician, songwriter, activist, writer, Billy Bragg, who has, for people of around my age at least, provided a soundtrack of sorts to our lives. Billy has always been engaged in the great political campaigns and issues of our time. He was there railing against the policies of Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan in the 80s, and he is still speaking out today about Neo-Liberalism, speaking out against racism, against Brexit, against Trump, still campaigning, still, dare I say, waiting for the great leap forward. Once Billy relied pretty much exclusively on his songs to convey his political message. These days he's branching out, having last year penned the polemical essay, The Three Dimensions of Freedom, which I'll show you on the screen. If I put it up really close, you'll see the ring of red wine that has stained the book over the reading over the last couple of nights. Fantastic book, and the red wine only adds to it. Billy is joining us on the line from Dorset in the UK. As Chrissy said, you can type in your questions to Billy as we go, and Chrissy will be putting some of them to him at the end of the discussion. Billy, it's great to have you with us.
It's great to be here, Paul. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'd just like to echo what Chrissy said by acknowledging the role of people from Britain in depriving the traditional owners of the land here in Australia for their true ownership.
Billy, we've all been in lockdown for the last couple of months. It's been a unique and strange experience for all of us. How much has your daily life and routine changed? And give us an idea of what life's been like for you.
Well, I'm in a very fortunate position. I live on the coast, so we've had a beach to walk on every day for our hours exercise. That's been absolutely fabulous. My partner, Juliet, she has a compromised immune system, so we've been self-isolating since a week before the official lockdown. So we've relied on the village shop to deliver our groceries. They've done a great job. It's a farm shop. So we've had a pretty good lockdown. Myself, I've been very busy because the demand for online content has just rocketed to levels where I'm really recording something every day or preparing for something every day. I mean, this morning I'm speaking to you. This afternoon I'll be recording a couple of songs for an anti-racist festival. I'm going to send them in a couple of weeks' time. And then at 8 o'clock this evening, we have our weekly recognition of frontline workers, health workers, care workers, key workers, where everybody around the country goes out in the streets to applaud and bang pots. We live about half a mile from the village, so I felt a bit lame standing in my back garden clapping to the starlings on the shed. So a few weeks ago, I decided to roll my big festival amplifier out in the back garden, set it up, and crank out a tune to people in the village. Last week, it was Blake's Jerusalem, and tonight they're going to get the Milkman of Human Kindness.
Fantastic, absolutely.
And that's just
fantastic.
today. That's just today. So, you know, and it kind of goes on. So it's really interesting how people have, you know, managed to sort of remain connected, okay, via the internet, but have still managed to remain connected during this, whether it's through, you know, getting online and talking to each other, but through social solidarity. I think it's a very important concept. You know, we talk in this country about social distancing is what we call the need to be 2 meters apart. I think we should call that spatial distancing. I think the social belongs to how we support one another. So spatial distancing and social solidarity has been something that I've been trying to respect, and I've been ever so pleased to see. I've been very encouraged as a progressive to see the way people have responded, supporting one another, both on a national level, big efforts, but also on a local and a one-to-one level, a personal level. I've been very encouraged by that.
Yeah, I don't want to diminish the terrible suffering and the terrible toll of this appalling virus, but I have noticed that there has been something about the recognition of the importance of community that has emerged out of this moment. Not only that, the heroic people at the front line in our system. I know that's been the case with the NHS in England. It's been the same here. Do you think there's been a recognition of that in the UK, of just what those people what they've done?
Very much so. I mean, that's why we're out in our gardens and our streets on Thursday night, to recognise that. Initially, it was just the NHS staff. Then we realised that care home workers were also putting their lives on the line to protect the old folk in their care. And then, of course, all those other really important people who are keeping us connected, keeping us safe, keeping us healthy, you know, those people who are out there working. I think everybody appreciates that people have gone beyond the call. The question is whether this appreciation is going to continue into the future, because ironically, many of these people have been castigated previously by the right wing in my country. You know, the attacks on teachers, on doctors and health staff, and particularly on immigrants in low-paid work, because there are many of the people who've been working on the front line. This has been a bit of a shameful shadow that's been over our society. Brexit kind of fired it up as well, the anti-immigrant fire. But now it's the immigrants who've kept us going. So we're probably going to have to keep reminding people of this. But I'm hoping that there will be a change in mindset, as there was during the Second World War. You know, they talk a lot at the beginning of this about the Blitz spirit. The Blitz spirit, which is what happened when the bombs were falling, everybody working together. That's what conservatives say, so they don't have to say social solidarity, because they don't like using those words. But the Blitz spirit is all about social solidarity. And that's why in July, it's the 75th anniversary of the British people throwing Winston Churchill out after he'd won the war. People can't understand how that happened. Why was Churchill turfed out like that? So, and not just, you know, lost vaguely lost. I mean, there's a landslide for Labour. It's because the social solidarity that people had experienced during the war, they wanted to carry on with that. They wanted the Blitz spirit to carry on. And they knew that Churchill and his Conservatives wanted to go back to how things were before. So I'm kind of hoping that that same spirit will be in my country now, and we won't just go back to, I can't conceive of how we could go back to what we referred to as laughingly as normal. Brexit Britain, which is not a normal place. If we go back to normal as we had before. I mean, I think it's similar. My understanding is your government has reacted in a completely different way than everybody expected. They've obviously recognised there's a new normal out there.
Absolutely. I mean, it has been a surprise to a lot of people that the rhetoric of anti-big government, which really we've seen throughout the West, which your book, in fact, touches on very much. We've seen really all that stood between us and a terrible death toll has been big government. So we've had big government in terms of regulating the movement of people, and big government in terms of rolling out money to those who need it to keep the economy lubricated. So, yeah, it's interesting. I was going to ask you, though, about Boris Johnson. You know, obviously his initial idea of herd immunity proved to be, and is continuing to prove to be, an absolute disaster. However, he himself suffered really from his own policies. If we are to believe what he said, he was pretty close to not being here anymore. Is there any evidence, Billy, that he has changed his tune on some of these social policies, has changed his tune on funding toward the NHS and so forth?
It's actually difficult to say, Paul, because we haven't really seen much of him since he came back. You know, he's not been out there every day at the press conferences. He turns up for Prime Minister's Question Time and sort of bumbles through that. I mean, the herd immunity, and I'm sorry to say, his own infection, and I wish him well, I wish it hadn't happened to him, because it's a horrible thing to happen to him, are all manifestations of the idea that he has of what he would refer to, I think, as personal liberty. And there are certain people on the libertarian side of politics for who personal liberty is actually a refusal to be held responsible for things that happen to other people. And that's what herd immunity was all about. It was all about, well, you know, if we're going to trace all these cases, it's going to cost money. We don't want to spend money on this. You know, why would we want to spend? This is not in our plan. So that was left until it was too late. And sadly, his own infection is part of his attitude to everything, which was summed up in perhaps of all the things he said, for my money, the most insidious thing he ever said, which was that he said, I am pro having my cake and I'm pro eating it. And the reason why I find that so troubling is because that is the motto of a man who believes that he has the right to first make the rules and then break them whenever he wants to. And that's a very dangerous person to have in politics, as we found in the United States of America.
Well, look, his political enemies have obviously been very critical of him. Is there a sense that you're getting from the community about how they're viewing the government's handling of this crisis? It would appear as we speak that the UK is going to come out of this with one of the highest death tolls in Europe, higher than Spain and Italy, which is almost inconceivable.
Yeah,
what's the public thinking about this?
Well, you have to remember that the Johnson government was very reluctant to engage with this idea. Very reluctant. That's where the herd immunity argument came from. Do nothing. Let's just see what happens. And there was a press conference the week before the official lockdown when somebody suggested whether they would keep people in their homes and use the police to enforce it, which they ultimately did. And Johnson responded to that with outrage. He was flabbergasted that that anyone would consider it, and B, and this is the important thing, that the British people would put up with something like that. It was a total misunderstanding. You know, many of us had already began to self-isolate. We could see what was going to happen here. And in some ways, the government was forced to lock down. I mean, the Premier League stopped playing. I mean, you know, big institutions were already taking care of their employees in a way the government wasn't. So that sense that we got from very early on in the epidemic that the Conservative government were behind the curve, were not on top of this, hasn't gone away. We still don't have a test. We still don't have a test and trace program 10 weeks in. And now they're asking the schools to reopen on June the 1st, an arbitrary date. And the teachers are saying, yeah, we'll reopen, but you've got to have test and trace in place. Otherwise, we're going to have a second wave. And I'm sure people are up to speed now and know that in 1918, the last, you know, very, very deadly pandemic, it was the second wave that killed most of the people because people became complacent. So the interesting thing that's happening now is that although people are beginning to use the parks and here the beach, which is understanding, nobody's rushing to go back to work. Yeah. People are like, you know, this we're not ready for this. So you've got to, they're waiting for the government to get things in place. And the feeling that the Conservatives are still behind the curve, they've never really been on top of this, is I think that's what's undermining not only the health of the nation, but our economic recovery.
Well, one of the things that interests me, and it does certainly relate to some of your thinking over the years, is that what coronavirus really has accentuated is national borders. I mean, at the moment, there is no movement across national borders in Europe. There's no one allowed into Australia. Countries have shut down. We've kind of moved from this world of globalization and free movement into really countries looking inward. And that has been necessary in terms of containing the virus, no doubt about that. I wonder if you've given any thought, though, as to the longer-term impact of this, Billy, in terms of, I mean, you've written a lot about anti-migrant sentiment in the UK. Is it possible that the things that we have needed to do to control the virus may in turn fuel greater insularity and further xenophobia in a country like the UK?
Well, in true Johnsonian way, we only closed our borders last week.
Is that right?
18.5 million people came into the UK through our airports and ports since the lockdown in the 10 weeks. And we closed last week and made people go into 14 days quarantine in classic this is the libertarian approach. You know, this is
Wow.
the kind of, we don't want to interfere in people's lives. And I think that is the real reason why accountability is an absolutely crucial aspect of freedom. You know, it's not just about what happens to you and to your family. I saw there was a headline yesterday in the New York Times, quoted a libertarian opposed to the lockdown in America who said, your face mask tastes like socialism. Tastes like socialism may well be the name of the next Billy Bragg LP. I'm not quite sure about that. But I thought to myself, damn right it does, because when you wear a face mask, you're expressing empathy with people beyond your own family. Yes, of course, it protects your own health, but you're also recognizing that you have a responsibility. When you go out in the community, you have responsibility to other people. And I think that aspect of liberty, that aspect of freedom, the accountability aspect, is what's been missing in the Brexit debate and the insular reaction to the European Union expecting Great Britain to be responsible for its actions. And that, I think, to get back to your point about the borders, I think it's going to be fine for Britain to leave the European Union and close its borders. But I think very soon we may find that we're going to take a huge economic hit. Only yesterday, Rolls-Royce, who's a huge employer in the UK, have said they're going to have to shed 9,000 jobs. Now, if you're looking at the international markets, and you've got to make a very hard decision somewhere that's also has its basis in economic thinking, then a country outside the European Union is much more likely to face job losses than one inside the European Union, where there's a huge market and components for your engines can move freely. So we are, with Brexit, it was going to be bad enough as it is, but the coronavirus has made that even worse. On one hand, we were supposed to be able to go out into the world and with our buccaneering spirit. And if you wonder what buccaneering spirit is, it's the right to sail around to the other side of the world and take someone's country away from them. That's what they're talking about. They're talking about colonialism, and they're talking about the way that we acted in the 18th and 19th centuries. But China now has diplomats that they refer to as wolf warriors. They're not messing about. You complained about and they slapped a tariff on your grain. These are not people who are going to put their arm around Great Britain and say, come back. Because, in the old days, when we sold things to China, they had the European flag on them. To the average Chinese person, that doesn't really have much significance. Put a Union Jack on something, and the first thing the Chinese think about is the Boxer Rebellion and how they were humiliated by the British during that. So on one hand, we've got a belligerent authoritarian China throwing its weight around. And on the other hand, we've got our usual ally who's been willing to stand up for democracy and human rights. The United States of America is taking hydrochloroquine, just short way from declaring officially that the earth is flat. So these are not times to be out on your own in the world. So all that buccaneering spirit, I fear, is going to come back and bite us in the buccaneering arse.
Well, these are also times when I think it's good to have a discussion about freedom and what freedom actually means. It is, as you know, it's a word that everybody bandies around. Everybody has their own agenda as to what it means. You spoke before about accountability. Spoiler alert, it's one of the three dimensions of freedom in the book, the other two being liberty and equality. But accountability is very much, I think, in terms of the most important dimension, the dimension that you focus on in the book. Why of all of the things that we think of when we think about freedom and our individual agency, why accountability? Why is that so important?
Because without accountability, you don't have any agency. Each of us have the liberty to express our opinion. That's a fundamental right in freedom, and it's the bedrock of freedom. empowers us to express our opinion. It empowers us to offend people if necessary, not to abuse people. I don't think it gives you the right to be abusive. I don't think that's part of liberty, but it does give you the right to say things that other people disagree with. But it requires also that you respect other people's right to express their opinion. So in that sense, equality is an absolute fundamental aspect of universal liberty, to ensure that everybody has the right to speak. But however, that doesn't ensure that the debate, the deliberation is conducted in a civil way. Because, you know, if it's just the right to speak and everybody's right to speak, then the person with the loudest voice or the most Twitter followers often wins out. So what you need in order to create a space in which we can all talk to one another as equals is accountability. People need to be held accountable for what they say and for what they do. And I originally became interested in accountability as a critique of globalization, because I felt that neoliberalism is inherently opposed to accountability. The idea that the market has all of the answers is an attempt by capitalism to avoid responsibility. And politicians that believe in neoliberalism equally. I mean, I sat in a TV studio once waiting to go on air and listened to a Tory minister respond to a question about whether or not they will be raising child allowance, the money that we give to families to help bring up children. And he actually said, we'll have to see what the bond markets think about that. No. Now, I don't remember voting for no bond markets. You know, that kind of lack of responsibility is worrying. So I've been thinking about accountability for a long time, but obviously the election of Donald Trump really brought accountability front and center in terms of politics, and the rise of Boris Johnson as well in my own country makes it, you know, freedom is a very important concept, but there are some types of freedom that are dangerous. And the most dangerous of them all is impunity. And I'm afraid that both in Donald Trump and in Boris Johnson, we have two figures who have lived their lives in complete lack of responsibility in their professional, political, and personal lives. To put those in a position of power is really problematic. So what I'm trying to do with the book, by offering the parameters of liberty, equality, and accountability, is provide a framework in which we can start to address these issues. I think we need to have some red lines, and obviously liberty, the right to express your opinion, is one of those red lines. Equality has always been a red line for everybody, but particularly for minority groups, including women. You know, not a minority, but they've struggled long for equality. But I'd like to add accountability to that. I think that has to be a really, really strong red line. We have to make a stand somewhere. And so I'm hoping that what the book does, it gives the reader a kind of a early warning system, so that they can look at politicians, they can look at people in positions of power and say, well, this person is not respecting equality. This person is not making themselves accountable. You know, in the 20th century, we kind of had ideology to do that. We all had our own ideology, left or right. And that kind of was a framework in which you could look at issues and think, where do I stand on this? You know, that's kind of gone now. So I'm suggesting that liberty, equality, and accountability not only helps you to judge what those in power are saying, but also gives you a frame of reference for social media discourse.
Absolutely.
Because you're often arguing with a stranger who, you know, whose profile doesn't even have a picture of a person. How do you very quickly work out whether it's worth talking to this person? Well, you ask yourself, are they treating me equally? Are they listening to what I'm saying? But more importantly, when I put a question to them, are they responding to that? Are they being accountable? Or are they just, you know, trying to be abusive or, you know, get out of order? And so, you know, it's a macro and micro argument.
Yeah,
you know, a
no,
little bit of accountability goes a long way. But if there's a big issue that affects so many of the other things that we're concerned about, I think accountability is that issue. You know, if you look at the big frontline movements of the 21st century, Me Too, Extinction Rebellion, Black Lives Matter, these seem to be single issue movements, but what they all have in common is they're all accountability movements. They're all attempts to make those in power accountable about issues of sexism, of racism and of environmental protection. So I think accountability is the key issue that we face, the key challenge that unites all the other disparate challenges that we face.
I think you provide a framework for understanding what we should mean by freedom of speech as well, actually. And I think that it's a term that can be used as cover for any manner of appalling behaviour. And we see that type of behaviour online all of the time, belligerent behaviour all of the time. You quote that line from Orwell, actually: if liberty means anything at all, it means the right to tell people what they do not want to hear. But actually, this is not really a sentiment that you agree with, is it?
No, it's not. I don't agree with it, because it's funny because, you know, when I wrote the book, I was looking for a point of reference, and always good for, if you're on the left and you're English, always kind of a good reference point. And there's a statue of him outside the BBC, because he worked for the BBC, and they've carved that quote into the wall. And I was actually on my way to do an interview about the book, and I looked at it and I thought, hang on a minute. You know, the right to tell people what they don't want to hear. Well, people don't want to hear that 2 and 2 equal 5. You know, you think Orwell would recognize that. People don't want to hear that the Holocaust never happened. You know, people don't want to hear that you know, women are not the equal of men. I mean, that's not a good quote to carve on the wall. It worried me. It worried me that one day, you know, long after I'm gone, they'll put a statue up to me somewhere and they'll carve on the wall, "I don't want to change the world." You know, so you got to be sort of careful what you imagine. So yeah, I think that ultimately you do have the right to say whatever you want to say. That's your right. But what you don't have is the right not to be criticized for it. Because if you look at the disagreements, the arguments that have gone down, they're very often, it's really about people didn't want to be criticized. They wanted to have the right to make their racist, sexist comment, and that somehow is their fundamental right. Well, I mean, you know, it's unfortunate, but it is their right. Like it or not, it is their right to make a racist, sexist comment, but they have absolutely no right not to be chastised for it.
Yeah.
And that's more often than not, you know, I had a bit of a falling out with Morrissey last year about this. My argument with him is not about what he says. It's about the idea that, you know, he shouldn't be taken on for that, you know, complaining about, you know, this old right-wing complaint, you know, you're not allowed to say this, you're not allowed to, you are allowed to say it.
Well, I was following,
you're not allowed to say it with impunity.
I was following that Morrissey dispute. I think a bit of a falling out might be understating it a bit. But this was the comment that he made after the astonishing performance by Stormzy at Glastonbury. I think the first time that a black solo performer had headlined at Glastonbury. It was a big moment in music and popular culture, and Morrissey sought to make it about himself, really, didn't he? and his own views. Yeah, and that's really, really unfortunate, because, you know, people have a lot of respect, and particularly Morrissey, because he, you know, in the 1980s, it was his lyrics articulated the feelings of the marginalized, the weakest, the victims of the bully. For him to then turn around and become that bully was, you know, it's heartbreaking for those of us who love the Smiths and love his solo work. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of one of the problems that we face is how do you, it's all very well being in favor of accountability, but how do you police it? How do you make it work? That is a real problem. But what you have to do is you have to keep focusing on that issue and not be sidelined by complaints and you know, attempts by people who have made racist or sexist comments to turn themselves into the victim. You have to keep focused on who the victim is here. And you know, that's you know, we should always stand up against those things, no matter who's saying it. You know, and we're all capable of making comments that we inadvertently offend people. You know, the terrible curse of Twitter is that perception always trumps intention. And we've all made faux pas, myself included, on that. And my response to that is, if someone makes a statement that could be construed as being racist or sexist or homophobic,
and they're called out for it, and they immediately backpedal and apologize and say, oh, no, 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 I'm really sorry. That was not my intention. I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt. But when they double down, as Morrissey did, I'm afraid that to me is implies that they actually do believe that, or they're not big enough to be able to show some respect to people that they may have unintentionally offended. So that's where the accountability comes in again, you know. And I over that Morrissey thing, I waited a week for the British press to pick up on that. I didn't like jump straight in and put the boot in on him. I waited for a week for someone to say something about that. So unfortunately, I had to spend it was a bank holiday Monday weekend writing something to put up online, and I think you kind of have to do that, you know.
Well, it wasn't the first time he'd made similar comments to that.
That's sad.
The issue of speech, though, it's a terribly fraught area, actually, because notwithstanding what you just said about Orwell and that quote, I mean, I'm very aware, I'm sure you are too, that we have the world that we live in and the people that we speak to and the views that we've hold and that we've refined over the years, our personal philosophies. But it is surely good for us to be challenged in those views, to have people put things to us that are in stark contrast to those views. I mean, in a sense, I want people to put that to me, even if at the end of the day I don't change my mind. It's a matter of how, and the problem obviously is, Billy, that social media makes it less likely that we come into contact with those views because of the algorithmic filter bubble, as they say. So it's really a question of how do we get that exposure to a wide range of opinion without being the victim of belligerence and bullying and so forth.
Yeah. Well, I think actually, Paul, if you're only hearing people who you agree with, that's really your fault, and you're not really using something like Twitter to broaden your political horizons. For instance, I'm 62 now. You know, my politics were forged in the 1980s in ideological terms, Marxist language that doesn't really connect with people anymore. My grasp of gender politics, and particularly in terms of transgender people, I get that almost all from following people in that milieu on Twitter. They're predominantly young people. They're predominantly people in their teens and 20s. And I follow them and I try and pick up on what they're saying and what they're expressing and get a bit of a you know, not you know, everything, but a perception of what's going on there. I think you should do that. For instance, you know, I follow the editor of The Spectator, which is a Tory paper. I follow him and see what they're talking about. You know, during the time when Corbyn was leader of the Labour Party, I followed several people who were in opposing factions. And I think you have to do that. But then the thing comes then is, how do you engage with those people? And this is when we come to the issue of the safe space. Now, safe spaces are a highly contentious concept, because people on the right feel that the imposition of the safe space is somehow a form of trying to prevent them from saying what they want to say. You know, it's a way of stopping them from expressing their opinion. I would argue that's not true. I would argue that the point of a safe space is to ensure that everybody gets to express their opinion without being intimidated. And that's really, really crucial, because we have to make a space where people feel that they can say what they want to say, whether they're coming from the left or whether they're coming from the right. And we want people in that moment to also be able to make a deliberative point rather than a pejorative point. If we're to learn something from that conversation. You know, we want to encourage deliberation. You know, there are spaces online. It's not all the Wild West. There's plenty of places where there's good deliberation, but there are some places where things can flare up. And the point of a safe space is to ensure that what the discourse that goes on is deliberative rather than confrontational. Now, whether that's in a physical space at a university or in a digital space online, liberty, equality, and accountability are the three parameters that create that 3D space. And so they're absolutely crucial to give confidence to people who have opinions that may not be shared by everybody in the space, that they can express those opinions. And so by ensuring that they, A, have the right to express it, B, that they're heard with respect, and C, that they're accountable for what they've said, that they respond to questioning in a way that responds to the question rather than the questioner. I mean, I think that's an absolute key aspect of social media discourse. You must play the ball and not the player. Absolutely crucial. So if you can have agreed parameters before you enter into that space, that these are the parameters, then it is possible to discuss things that are painful, things that are difficult, things that are taboo, providing everybody respects one another and is accountable for what they say. And that, so that's what I'm trying with the book. I'm also trying to set up that, I mean, I'll make the safe space argument in there. It's not about censorship, a safe space. It's about ensuring that everybody gets to speak. And those predominantly right-wing men who get themselves banned are almost all provocateurs. They're people who are going there for the clicks and shits and giggles. They're not going there to broaden people's understanding of their political point. People like Milo, they're just doing it for the wind up. And how we deal with them and as a community is really, really important. But also we have to have space in which people can express opinions that do offend some people, because that's how we take them apart. That's how we undermine their beliefs. We use rationality. And I'm hoping that, the parameters I suggest in the book can lead to a discourse, political discourse, social media discourse, press discourse, based on responsibility and rationality. There's not enough of that in the world at the moment, and it's really, really concerning.
We touched on Neo-Liberalism. You remind us in your essay that since about the 1980s, throughout much of the West, we've embraced and then accelerated globalization, free trade, deregulation. All of this has come to be known as Neo-Liberalism. It's an idea based on the assumption that free markets, open trade across borders is best for us. But then, as we've touched on, along comes this virus. It shuts the borders down. We all go inward. We are relying on ourselves. We're relying on governments. We're relying on people with expertise. And as I said before, in a country like Australia, we see the re-emergence of big government. Is it possible that in this moment that we are now in, that we could see a shift away, a perhaps semi-permanent shift away from the neoliberal political sentiment that has dominated for so long?
Well, we're already in Britain, as you understand, with Brexit, we're already halfway down that route towards nationalism and borders. Although where the border is, we'll have to wonder. I mean, it looks very likely now that there will have to be some kind of customs border in the Irish Sea. And I wouldn't be surprised if within 10 years there's a customs border between Scotland and England as well, because, Brexit is an English exceptionalist plot, I'm afraid. So that aspect we're very aware of here. I think we understand now how as communities we relate to one another, and there've been a number of challenges that we've faced over the years that have required us to act nationally rather than internationally. And I think globalization is a project again, based on lack of accountability. The idea you don't have to pay your taxes where you earn your money, these kind of things, they're absolutely key. And on top of that, the neoliberal sort of motto, which is what we call TINA, there is no alternative. There's no other way of running an economy other than this one. Well, that's clearly not true. We're finding that out. There are other ways of running an economy. All right, the farmer might choose your potatoes, but at least you're getting potatoes. Don't worry about it. It's going to be okay. But I think at the same time as we're moving back from economic globalization, obviously the big challenges that we face, the obvious one being the changes in the climate, can only be responded to internationally. So we desperately need to make strong international bonds in order to deal with those things. But that possibility is fracturing. And one of my big concerns is that the authoritarian model of government is becoming more and more popular as the Western nations, as Europe, and particularly the United States of America, sort of step back from being involved in global issues. Xi Jinping in China is moving forward, and consequently, the difference there is that whereas Europe, United States of America, and other westernized countries would work to ensure human rights and democracy in emerging nations that they were supporting. Obviously, Xi Jinping has a different economic model, an authoritarian model that doesn't have any room for human rights. And consequently, that argument, I think, is starting to turn heads. And we desperately need those countries that believe in democracy, believe in fundamental rights, to work together to make sure that that idea is the one that spreads to developing nations, and not the authoritarian idea of where the Chinese are happy to come in and help you with your economy and don't really care who's in your prisons. That's a very, very worrying development. And we've taken it for granted that democracy will always be the most favored method of running a society. That's no longer true. That's under challenge at the moment. And because we're sort of become more interested in what's happening in our own countries, partly because of the coronavirus, but before as well, I think that we're not in good shape to challenge that authoritarian idea of governance that the Chinese are promoting.
Well, there's authoritarianism, and on the other hand, there's populism, which of course we've seen as well. I think Brexit is a populist cause. Obviously,
very much
populism contributes a lot to Trump's appeal in the US. And I suppose the question that we've been ruminating on in terms of the rise of this form of political populism over the past few years is, why at a time when so many people are aggrieved about their economic position and their economic future, are they not turning to more progressive centre-left political parties, but instead many of them are looking towards these populist causes? What, as someone who's been on the left for your whole life, what would your response to that be?
Well, I would say there's a marked kind of similarity between what's happened in the UK and what's happened in the United States of America. I think that people want, since the crash of 2008, average working people's standard of living hasn't risen. In fact, in the UK, the young people now are the first generation who are going to be poorer than their parents were since the Second World War. And this is a real shock to a lot of people. So people want economic reform. They want change. They want the ability to bargain in the workplace for better wages. That globalization has robbed them from that. On the other hand, the political parties in charge of all different stripes believe in neoliberalism, and neoliberalism's central tenet is there is no alternative. So the neoliberal system is not able to bring the change that people want. And this is the problem. I mean, I'm sure Hillary Clinton would have been a great president of the United States of America, but she was not the change candidate. Trump was the change candidate. And the same with Brexit. Remaining in the European Union was not the change option. When people want something to change, and also both in terms of Trump and in terms of Brexit, they were ideas that were contrary to those promoted by the central government, by the ruling elite. So if you feel that since the 2008 crash that the people in power have done nothing for you, in fact, what they've done is messed up your life, and now you've got an opportunity to vote for something that's going to mess their life up, because you're not going to get the change you want. You can't, they're not offering you the change, but they are offering you the opportunity to kick them in the arse, to against Washington, against Westminster. And a lot of the votes since 2008 in the UK have been against Westminster. The fact that twice since 2008, our electoral system threw up coalitions. That's not supposed to happen. The Scottish referendum nearly went the way for independence. The election of Jeremy Corbyn as well, I think, was a reaction against Westminster. He was a change candidate, and the other four candidates were cookie-cutter Blairites. There was no change there. People want change, but the system is unable to deliver it. And I think, unfortunately, you have to assume that if people are not offered change, they will vote willingly for chaos, because their lives have been made chaotic by people in Washington and London and Brussels, and they're pushing back against that. And I have to say, much as I despair about it, it is understandable on one level if people respond that way.
Yes, but if Corbyn was the change candidate, at least at the last election, it was a very poor response to the change that he was enunciating. Certainly, I think a poorer outcome than some were predicting. It certainly didn't get the Bernie Sanders vibe happening anyway.
No.
Why did he perform so badly at the last election? And also, if I can ask a sort of secondary question, what are you making of the new Labor leader, Keir Starmer?
Yeah, I don't think anybody, even Tony Blair, could have defeated Get Brexit Done. Because what it did was it lined up everybody who'd voted for Brexit into one voting bloc behind Boris Johnson. And the whole point of Brexit was to give the Conservatives a rallying point, because they were aware that their ideology was fading because younger people were coming through with more contemporary ideas. The same in the United States of America with Trump. You know, it's a consolidation of angry white men who are finding themselves soon to be in a minority. So I don't think any leader could have got through that. And it's hard to imagine Corbyn to come from the position he was in to win. You know, he was not a figure that went in there because he wanted to be the leader. You know, Tony Blair had a long plan to become leader. He had everything thought through. Corbyn was kind of thrown into that place. And in many ways, it was the willingness of party members to try and get him there. So his lack of preparedness and focus at the general election ultimately, I think, did for him. But there were a lot of really great ideas. And what he did do was he kind of moved the window of debate, because I think the Tories had already began to row back, the new Conservative government, to row back from austerity. He'd made that case really, really well, but sadly, he wasn't able to win the election. The new leader, Keir Starmer, he's done very well so far in confronting Johnson in the Commons, but that's because he's a lawyer, and the way the Commons is configured at the moment, it's almost as if the Prime Minister's in the dock, because he hasn't got his 300 MPs behind him howling and baying and waving their order papers like they're at Hogwarts. So that, so it remains to be seen. But the question is, what lessons can Starmer learn from what's happened with the coronavirus? Because one of the big issues here has been that Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales have gone their own way on coming out of the lockdown. And there are areas of England, the northeast, the northwest, where the infections are still rising. And they want a different set of rules. So the argument that's long been made in this country for regional devolution within England, devolution is a Labour Party issue. You know, it was the Labour Party that devolved power to Scotland, to Wales and to Northern Ireland, but they've never done this for England. So I'm hoping that Starmer will pick up on that issue and make it central to the party's offer, because again, it comes back to accountability. Because what's at the back of all this, really, and you kind of touched on it right at the very top, is how do you give people the feeling that they have agency over their lives? How do you give people a feeling that they have some say and what they say will be acted upon? And that's agency. And it's the lack of agency inherent in neoliberalism, the lack of agency available to ordinary working people in a globalized economy, that has caused a lot of these problems. How do we restore that sense of agency? Well, the obvious way is to have a fairer voting system than in the United States and in the UK, to make it possible for people to bargain for better wages and conditions in the workplace, and to have mechanisms whereby we're able to hold those in power to account. Because the thing about accountability, why it's the absolutely crucial component of freedom, is because it's the component that gives freedom its teeth. It allows you to both, whereas liberty empowers you to express your opinion, and equality is reciprocal because you have to respect other people's point of view, accountability works both ways. It empowers you to hold others to account, but it also requires you to reciprocate by being accountable yourself. So I think accountability, and I would also argue accountability is the bedrock of socialism anyway. You know, because in my country, and I know in your country as well, the Labour Party rose out of the trade unions. It rose out of the campaign for accountability in the workplace. So this is not, it's not the ideological Marxist arguments that we had in the 1980s. And some of my friends that I did gigs with during then will be sort of like not pleased to hear me declare that I'm a progressive. But I think I've found over the years that I've been articulating my politics less ideologically and much more in terms of deeper humanistic ideas such as empathy. I mean, these are the key things. And I think as a musician, that behoves me, because the currency of music is empathy. Whether you're listening to me or Adele or anyone, you know, what we're trying to do is help you to feel emotions that you know, you can't access yourself. And often by giving you an example of someone else that's been through that problem, emotional, political, social, whatever it is, and you feel for them by listening to that song. Empathy, we don't have enough empathy. In some ways, you know, there's a war on empathy. Anyone who expresses empathy is dismissed as being politically correct, which, you know, political correctness, by the way, doesn't even exist. I mean, you know, political correctness is a trope used by reactionaries to police the limits of social change, to keep women and people of color in their place. So, you know, we need more empathy, and as musicians, we have an opportunity to express that. And I think in these difficult times, we should be ramping up the empathy in everything we do.
Let's talk a bit about music. For you, there is not a great degree of separation between music and politics, really. But let's talk about it. I mean, we live in a time when virtually every song ever recorded can be found online in seconds and played. This is both fantastically liberating, but I also wonder whether the currency of music and how we once discovered it has been diminished in the process. What are your thoughts? Is music as powerful and as potent, and is the political song, the song with the political message, as able to cut through today as it was when you released some of your earlier albums, when Bob Dylan released his early protest songs? What do you think?
I think there's a couple of things going on here, Paul. Firstly, I don't think political music still cuts through in the way it did before. And the main reason for that, I think, is that music no longer has a vanguard role in youth culture. In the latter part of the 20th century, if you had views about the world and you were a young person, there was only one medium available for you to express your views. For me, when I was 19, I had to learn to play guitar, write songs and do gigs. That was it. There was nothing else. So as a result, all of the experience of young people had to be channeled through music. And the music you listened to, it told you who to hang out with, who not to hang out with, how to cut your hair, how to dress, where to go. It was our social medium. We didn't think of it that way. Now, if you're a young person and 19 and you're angry about the world, you have so many different ways of expressing that. And as a result, music is no longer the first port of call for political activism. But that's cool, because it in many ways, it broadens the opportunity for people to express their views. That's a good thing. But the downside is, of course, I don't think people are ever going to be able to ask to come to tour Australia to read out their tweets. So if you do want to see the world, learning an instrument is not a bad thing. But on the other side of that, as you mentioned, all the music in the world is available now for nothing, you know, cheap as chips. So you would think that people would not have high regard for music, but quite the opposite is true, actually. More and more people are going to gigs, more and more people are going to festivals. So what's going on here? What's going on? Well, I think what digitalization has done has revealed the real role of music in our society, and that is as a place where we can have a communal experience, where we can get out of ourselves, because there's something you can get at a gig that you can't get online. You know, you go to a gig. If you have, imagine, I mean, all of us have songs that say something that we ourselves can't quite articulate, something really deep and really important. We all have them. We all have that artist. You go and, it's not a political thing. You go and see that artist. They're singing that song that means so much to you. You're singing it, and 5,000 other people are singing it. You have a sense of of solidarity from that. You have a sense of acceptance, whatever it is that's in there. You feel that you're part of something there. You can't get that online. I mean, that's why they sing in church. That's why they sing at the football.
Yeah.
You know, they're trying to focus communal emotion. So that communion that you get, and I think it is a form of communion that you get at a gig, that's what people are coming for. That's what they really need beyond. And I think particularly after the confinement that we've faced over the past couple of months, that will be even more important now. When we go to the big gigs next year, in the back of our minds, in the festivals, the back of our minds will be how fragile this is, and how being with people is more than just a gig. It's a celebration of humanity in all its fabulous forms. And, you know, because you do, you know, the spirit of lockdown, everybody being in it together and working together, you know, that's how we get through a muddy Glastonbury. You know, because the thing about Glastonbury is you can't walk to the station. There ain't no station. You know, it's like almost like you're on an island at Glasgow, and everybody helps everybody out. You know, you're forever picking drunks out of the mud. You're forever bringing people into the tent. You're forever sharing out your baked potato or whatever, a bit of campfire. That spirit, we really, really miss that spirit. And music has that in spades wherever you are in the world. So I think, you know, that's the difference. Let's not worry about whether or not there's going to be another Bob Dylan or even another Billy Bragg. There's plenty of people out there putting those ideas around. Let's just come together to celebrate our empathy and our basic fundamental humanity. That's the role that music has, and everything else springs from that. You know, when the lockdown first happened, I thought, great, I'll have some time at home to dig through the crates and pull out some vinyl I haven't heard for years and years. And indeed, that's what I did for the first couple of weeks. But it didn't take long for me to feel that sense of loss that you just described, that actually for music to remain vital and alive, it needs to be performed, and there needs to be that connection between the person who loves the music and the person performing it. So we're all waiting for that moment, waiting for you indeed, Billy, to come to Australia. I noticed a couple of years, the tour before last, I was in Australia. I was with Joe Henry playing acoustic shows, you know, and he had to go home from the Melbourne show. He went back to the US, and I had a gig out in Perth, and I was hoping to get on the GAN and go up to Darwin on the train. I'd never done that before from Adelaide. And unfortunately, I say unfortunately, it wasn't unfortunate, but unfortunately they added an extra show in Melbourne because it was so popular. And that took out the Tuesday, because it only goes on a Tuesday. So I didn't get to, so I was I like 4 days. So they, you know, what would they do? You know what they're going to do. They're going to book me a gig in Adelaide. So they booked me a gig at the Governor Hindmarsh in Adelaide, a big old corner pub. I turned up at there, and I don't think I'd done an electric solo show for a year. And I was like, what am I going to do? And I'll tell you what, it was Monday night. It was Monday night, and it was raining. I thought, oh, this could really go bad. I've really got to be on my mettle tonight. Otherwise, it's just going to be one man and his dog. But unbeknownst to me, it was the night before Anzac Day. Oh, so instead of being a Monday night, it was like a Saturday night. The audience rammed in there. They got roaring drunk. And we ended up, because I didn't have a set list in my head, I just wrote a load of songs down. I think I wrote 17 songs down. I actually ended up playing about 26, 27 songs. Because what happened was, we got into this thing about Brewing Up, the album Brewing Up.
Oh, fantastic.
And I played as many songs as I could remember. And then the audience remembered the lyrics to some other ones that I could remember. And about halfway through, I stopped and said to the audience, you know, I'm not sure here if I'm indulging you or you're indulging me. And it was from that experience that the whole idea of doing the 3-night retrospective thing, where I went back through the early albums, came from that experience in the Gov. And I mention that because, as I say, to all intents and purposes, when I walked into that place, I thought it was going to be a tough night. But the audience had a completely different idea.
That's a great story.
Sense of feeling from the audience that I got, that I built on, it ended up being, it was one of those gigs where everybody, I mean, at the end, at the merch stall, everybody just had the biggest grin on their faces, because we just had a brilliant night together, and you live for that. That's what I'm missing. That's what's in the back of my mind, you know. So that's why I'm thinking, you know, I'm so glad that we've only postponed the Australian dates and we've not cancelled, because the audiences in Australia and New Zealand to some extent, have been hugely supportive of me over the years. You know, they've been a place where I can come both to recharge my batteries and my sense of faith in people, but also economically. You know, they've, whatever tour I come with, even if it's not a Billy Bragg, you know, I brought a Woody Guthrie tour there, that sold out. I came with Joe, that sold out. Audiences in Australia have been so supportive to me over the years, and it's really, it's kind of really got me. So it's been the one thing that I've been really felt deprived of during the lockdown. As I say, we've been very fortunate where we live. We're well supported here. You know, I'm a person who works from home anyway, but you know, the thing that I've really been thinking, damn,
yeah,
it's been the Australian and New Zealand dates. So it's great to be able to connect with you tonight, with all of you, not just with you, Paul, and with Chrissy and people at Avid, but with everybody here tonight. And it's been, you know, I think maybe, you know, the sooner that tour comes, the better. I'm really looking forward to it.
Absolutely, we all are. A moment of self-indulgence before I hand over to Chrissy, who's going to fire some audience questions at you. I'm so glad you mentioned the Brewing Up album, because I was a young radio DJ at a community radio station in Melbourne when I heard the very first song of yours in my life, and played it that night on the radio show, which was The Saturday Boy from Brewing Up, which, yeah, I am a big softie. So look, really great to talk to you, Billy. Let's make sure we catch up in the flesh when you are in Melbourne. I know so many, or in Brisbane and in Australia. But look, what I'm going to do now is hand back to Chrissy, who I'm expecting has got a bag of questions for Billy. But Billy, thanks for talking to us. Fantastic.
Thank you, Paul. It's been great talking to you, mate. I look forward to seeing you in February.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Chrissy, over to you.
I do have a bag of questions here, actually. You've been firing them at me thick and fast, so I have a few here. One of them is, do you think, this is from Carolyn Ride, do you think the coronavirus crisis will be reawakening our social consciousness?
I think so, yeah. I think the people coming out to applaud on Thursday nights, they're basically applauding people who are on low wages. They're often people of colour. They're often immigrants. You know, the government decided that they would give special dispensation to NHS workers who are the families of NHS workers who died, who'd been working in hospitals and contracted the coronavirus and died. And people started to point out, you know, that's got to include the cleaners. It can't just be the medics. It can't just be the you know, the hands-on frontliners. It's got to be everybody that's working. And so consequently now, and many of these medics are indeed immigrants whose status is not confirmed. You know, I was listening to it on the radio just this morning. They're leaning on the Conservatives to recognise that these people have put their lives on the line. They've lost loved ones. And so I do believe that. Yeah, I mean, I have to say, you know, I'm a socialist, so I have to believe the glass is half full. I have to believe in people's fundamental humanity. And so that's what makes me think, yeah, people will change.
I do think we go to the supermarket these days and we look at the people serving us and we feel differently about them.
Exactly. Exactly.
There's a question here from Jackie. Is it ever possible to change someone's mind on these online spaces, or is it just shouting back and forth? Do you think it is possible to make change?
Yeah, I mean, I've had my mind changed on things. I think, you know, I've sort of, I mean, you know, I'm having to learn about the contours of the debate around transgender rights. I'm having to moderate my language. I'm having to, instead of just using the first pronoun that comes to mind, if I go in a shop or somewhere, I have to now look and think if this young person is not necessarily a male or female, and then I need to recognize that out of respect to them. So yeah, I think you obviously you have to be willing to do that. You have to be willing to accept. But that, I think that if you're that kind of person who wants to learn about things, you know, it's really, really crucial. You know, politics isn't the same as it was in the 20th century. And even back then in the 20th century, at the start of the miners' strike, I knew everything there was to know about racism. I didn't really know a great deal about sexism. I had to kind of learn that on the hoof. That's what Greetings to the New Brunette is about. It's me trying that ideological cuddle. It's me trying to get my head around the ramifications of sexism and how that is as much part of politics as racism. It's because it's a form of discrimination. So yeah, it's an ongoing process, and you have to be open to that.
Fantastic. There's a question here from Abby. Wearing badges is not enough. How about music? Is that no longer enough?
Well, music has a role, doesn't it? It has a role to play, but in the end, it's how you inspire people to activism. You know, when I come and do a gig, I usually finish off with a song called "There Is Power in a Union," and I'll sort of ramp up the political vibe at the end. I'll make my closing thoughts about whatever's going on. We finish off with a, you know, punk fist in the air. And when I come off stage, my activism is 100% charged. The batteries are like that, you know, I'm fired up. And my job is to make the audience go home with that same feeling, to send them home fired up too. You know, it's not enough just me getting it. They've got to get it, because the thing is, you know, those individuals may live in, you know, exist in a environment where there's a lot of casual racism, sexism, homophobia, and they're getting some solidarity in that room. I want them to take a bit of that solidarity away with them. That's really, really crucial, because in the end, if you want to change the world, you need the empathy that we were talking about. You need the empathy. That's crucial. But you also need activism. And my job is to try and inspire people to take that empathy, add it to that activism, put them together. And that's where solidarity comes from. And it's the solidarity that's the bedrock of change. So music does still have a role to play, but not all music all the time in the way it was in the 20th century. Some musicians are into that, and I'm still doing my best to make that work, to make those connections.
There's a kind of related question here from Jackie, which is, you've written a few books now, and how about fiction? A novel or short stories? What would a Billy Bragg fiction look like? Would that also create that empathy and bring, you know, are you interested in doing that at all?
Well, we're not supposed to talk about writing books, because look, I don't know how to tell you this, but look, listen, no offense, I'm actually a musician. And they want me to make a record next, not another book. So don't be saying these kind of things. You're going to get me in trouble with everybody. But yes, one of the things I did when the lockdown happened is, of course, I started to scalp out my novel, like everybody. But I'm afraid contemplating my novel over the last few months has been about as much use as contemplating my navel, I'm afraid. I'm not sure that... I can, just because I can write a book doesn't mean you can write a novel. They're two different things, a book and a novel. If anyone's written a book, you know what I mean. A novel is a different thing. You have to, you know, the great critique of George Orwell is that his novels, the characters in his novels are not up to snuff. I don't agree with that, but I can see where that comes from. It's a different, writing a polemic, which is, or a social history, which is what my Skiffle book is, a social history, it's a different beast to writing a novel. I mean, you know, I'm reading a Melissa Harrison novel at the moment, All Among the Barley, and it's just so engrossing, engaging. It's set on a farm in the 1930s, but it's taken me back to time I spent on my aunt and uncle's farm as a child in the 1970s, and I'm really, really enjoying it. But looking, as you do look analytical as a creative person, how did they do this? You know, you're always looking underneath. How does that work? It's a different degree. It's a different degree of work for a novel, I think.
It's a lot of work, but you as a poet, I think, have a head start on many of them.
And it's a great thing to do, because it kind of, writing books gets me out of the music industry headspace for a bit, so that when I come back, I'm fresh. So it's a great thing to be able to do. And also, you know, it's kind of a different way of going around and talking to people. You meet different people on the book circuit. So I've really, really enjoyed that aspect of things, and I will write more books, but whether it'll be a novel, I don't know.
We've had a lot of questions about politics tonight on the actual interview, but I'll just throw a couple in here. Mark has said there seems to be a lack of solidarity on the left, which benefits the unaccountable right. How can we sort of fix this and provide a solidarity on the left side of politics?
Yeah, I think that's always been a bit of a problem. I think the right seem to be unified because they often have the press behind them. I'm not sure they are as unified as they could be. Certainly the Conservative Party going into Brexit, delivering Brexit, they've put it off and they've put it off and they've put it off by refusing to engage. But ultimately Brexit forces them to choose between sovereignty, national sovereignty, and the markets. And they're the two bedrocks of their ideology. So that could be very, very divisive for them. I think on the left, there are always people who are trying to push the envelope and make things more equal, makes things more fair. There's never a place where we get to where we're in utopia. It's going in that general direction. And you're always going to have people arguing over the map. So how to resolve that, I don't know, but how we deliver fundamental change that makes people's lives different and deliver agency to people, then I think we do have to step away from ideological terms and start talking about issues such as accountability and greater empathy as a starting place, not as an ideology, but just as a place where our politics are going to be based, and a position which we continue to refer back to above and beyond ideological considerations.
That's fantastic. Look, I do have a dozen or more questions here, which I could ask you, but many of them have been covered in our conversation with Paul. But I have about 20 people that have asked us if at the end of this, if we can have a group sing along. Now, I don't know if that's a possibility at all, but and whether we could.
What are we going to sing?
I am assuming one of your songs.
Oh, I thought maybe we could sing Advanced Australia Fair Skinned. That famous old song, that old chestnut.
That was just one question from the audience. I don't know whether, and lots of people have said it actually. It's been like every second question's been like, can we have a sing along at the end? But
all right, well, let me see if I can find. I'm going to have to go behind the veil here. I haven't had no questions about my fabulous backdrop. Why is nobody saying, Bill, why can't we see your crappy office? Why have you got this lovely backdrop? I'll tell you why I've got a lovely backdrop, because I'm a rock star. That's my rock star backdrop. Well, let me see if I can find a guitar behind it.
Okay.
What I can find here. What have we got? Aha! What is this? Hang on, wait a minute. Hang on. What's this? My old man's a dustman, he wears a dustman's hat. He wears cool blimey trousers and he lives in a council flat. Yeah, how's that?
That's very beautiful.
How was that?
Gorgeous.
How did that work? Did that work all right?
Fantastic.
Oh dear, oh dear. So what do you want to hear, Chrissy? Have a quick vote among your readers.
Have we got people suggesting something? Oh, there's quite a few actually.
Anyone say go back to bed?
No,
tell them to go back to bed.
Great Leap Forward, Saturday Boy, Milkbed of Human Kindness.
Oh dear.
Something. There's Power in the Union.
I'll tell you what. Next week, and this is an exclusive. I'm getting involved in a thing to raise money for health workers in the UK. And it's a voting thing where I put up 5 songs that I'm going to cover, and the one that gets the most votes, I have to play it live on the Saturday night next week. But it's £1 a vote, and you get to vote. And I've had a great time choosing the songs. So do look out. I can't say any more about it, but do look out for that, because they're all songs I've never played. And I'm thinking to myself, this could be a lot of fun doing this. So let's see what happens. All right, listen, I'm really sorry, folks, I'm not there. It really is, as I said earlier, it's been the one thing that has pained me through these last couple of weeks to not be able to come to Australia, because, as I say, the support I've had there, to bring the 3 night shows to Australia would have been a real treat, a real way of sort of connecting with an audience that's been so supportive of me over the years. So I'm sorry I can't be there. I will be coming in February. In the meantime, I suppose you can have a bit of this. Oh, I've got a guitar pick here.
At the
But
end,
this is it. After this, you've all got to go. You've all got to go home.
Shall I unmute people at the end so that they can sing right towards the end of it?
If they know the words. may have been Camelot for Jack and Jacqueline. In a field somewhere in Dorset, I see a different scene. Everybody's wondering just where the country's going. I think that we're up shit creek and neurosis is showing. Because the truth is that Britain has grown tired of being great, so it's going back to being Little England. This is too bloody high for the morning. I'm going to have to take it down a tone. Sorry about this, everyone. It's a bit very gay. Here we go. Here. In the former Soviet Union, the citizens demand to know why they're still the target of strategic air command. So they shake their fists in anger and respectfully suggest we take the money from our nuclear weapons and spend it on the NHS, the National Health Service. Yeah. Donald Trump is fond of bending countries to his will. He just slaps on the tariffs and pushes up their bills. But if Brexit goes to no deal, then we will be the first people who voted to put sanctions on themselves. How mad is that, I ask you? No one knows how many children Boris Johnson sired, or can remember how many times his lies have got him fired. But I will tell you this, mate, I know how this will end when he does to Britain what he's done to his ex-girlfriends. Yeah, you know what that is. Jumble sales are organised and we're all on the Zoom. Here I am playing to Australia and I haven't even left me room. Yeah. Active with the activists or sleeping with the media while you're waiting for the great leap forwards. One leap forwards, 2 leaps back. Will Brexit get us all to sack? Waiting for the great leap forwards. Well, here comes the future and you can't run from it. If you've got a website, I want to be on it. That's all we've got for the next few months, kids, I'm afraid, yeah. In a perfect world, we'd all sing in tune, but there ain't nobody that can sing like me, way over yonder in the minor key. Well, if no one out there understands, start your own bloody podcast and cut out the middleman. Every bastard's got one. So join the struggle while you may. The revolution's just a Zoom tour away. Yeah. When you're waiting for the great leap forwards. I want to say thank you to Chrissy and everybody at Avid and Paul for inviting me to speak to you all.
We're going to unmute everyone so that they can clap now. It's going to be a cacophony, so we won't be able to get you back easily. Here they all come.
Johnny Billy.
Thank you, thank you.
Pleasure. See you all.
Hey.
Hope to see you all soon.
Love you, Billy.
See you, Bill.
Yay. Billy.
Awesome.
Billy.
Love you, Billy. Thank you.
Please, people.
Look, Billy.
Bye, Billy. Bye.
Thank you.